Hello students, welcome to the first year BCom program. Today we are going to study under business economics the basics of demand and supply. Under the basics of demand and supply, we are going to look at the quantity demanded, which tends to be equal to the quantity supplied at a certain price, and that price is called as market equilibrium price. So precisely we are going to learn today how to determine the market equilibrium price. Demand for a commodity is a function of number of factors, the main being price, followed by consumers' income, taste, preferences, price of substitute products, complementary goods, geographical conditions, political and policy factors, etc. They are also called as determinants of demand. However, we know that price is a singular most important factor determining the demand for a commodity. Hence, it is very essential to understand the relationship between demand and the price and how quantity is influenced. Demand is the starting point for understanding how a market performs. Hence, according to the law of demand, we know that demand and quantity demanded, always varies inversely with price. Whenever the law of demand is under study, it is always generally assumed that all other factors other than price remain constant. A very normal demand function is always represented as quantity of commodity X demanded is a function of the price of X. If we have to show a linear demand function, then it is expressed as Q dx is equal to A minus B Px, where we know that A is quantity demanded when price is 0, and therefore it is a constant and is called as an intercept parameter on the linear demand curve. The demand curve intercepts the x-axis at a quantity, and it is at point say B, for example, which is the correlation coefficient between the quantity demanded and price. Now B is negative because of an inverse relation between the price and the quantity demanded. So the final equation appears as delta Q dx upon delta Px, where delta, or a small triangle which is represented, is nothing but indicating a change. A imaginary example shows there is price of commodity X and quantity demanded of commodity X. We have a given demand function which shows Q dx is equal to 100 minus 10 Px. So what does it signify? It means that the quantity of commodity X is going to be demanded at different prices. So when the price per unit is 0, it means the quantity demanded is 100, the highest quantity demanded. Whereas as the price increases from 0 to rupees 1 to rupees 3 and finally rupees 6, the quantity demanded has declined to 40 units at rupees 6, which indicates an inverse relationship again between the price and quantity demanded. And when represented on a x and y axis diagram, we get a typical downward sloping linear demand curve expressing the inverse relationship between price and quantity demanded. So when the price is high, the quantity demanded is less, and when the price declines, the quantity of demanded also increases. To understand market equilibrium, we also have to understand the supply function. What is supply? Supply is the quantity of a commodity which is supplied by the seller at a given price. Here, the quantities which are supplied will be nothing but the amount which is offered by the seller to sell at various corresponding prices. It is generally noted that at higher prices, the producers are more willing to supply the product for sale, and there is definitely a direct relationship between the price and the quantity supplied. Therefore, a typical supply curve will have a positive slope, unlike the demand curve, which has a negative slope. A typical supply function appears like this. Quantity supplied for commodity X is equal to a function of the price of X. Similarly, a linear supply function would appear as QSX is equal to minus C plus DPX, where minus C represents quantity supplied at zero price. Minus C also is the intercept on the supply curve, and it is negative because generally at zero price there is no seller who is ready to supply the product for sale. And D is the correlation coefficient. So ultimately what we arrive at is delta QSX upon delta PX. To establish market equilibrium, we require the demand side and the supply side to be equal to each other at a certain price. In other words, the demand for and supply of quantity of commodity X must be equal at a certain price. In the above equation, when we substitute the values, we arrive at a equilibrium price which is rupees 3 and 50 paise. Now when we substitute the equilibrium price, that is rupees 3.50 paise, into the demand equation and the supply equation, we arrive at the quantity of units demanded and the quantity of units supplied at that price, which is exactly equal to each other, and that is at 65 units. Any deviation from equilibrium price will either lead to a shortage or a surplus, and eventually demand and supply will adjust to each other at a given equilibrium price. And finally, in terms of a diagram, what we have is a downward sloping demand curve and an upward sloping supply curve. The higgling and haggling of the prices will eventually help the demand and supply to settle down at an equilibrium price of P, and quantity demanded and supplied will settle at OQ. So students, I hope you all have understood the concept of how to determine a market equilibrium price and how the quantity demanded tends to be equal to the quantity supplied at that market equilibrium determined price. Thank you.